Greetings, extraterrestrials, and welcome to History for Aliens Roman History, Episode 2, Wazzup in the Mediterranean. This slideshow will be setting up Roman history to come, and we're going to talk about a bunch of the Roman neighbors. And as Rome spreads, and we bump into these different civilizations and people, you won't even need to Google who these people are, because in this slideshow, we're going to talk about most, if not all of them. So what is the Mediterranean? Well, you see behind Wazzup in the Mediterranean, it's that Black Sea that separates Europe and Africa. So let's begin. We're going to talk about ancient Greece for a while. Ancient Greece can be described as a bunch of separate city-states or polis that are usually at war or disagreement with one another until a foreign invader comes along, and then they all need to unite. So if they're not at war with each other, they're united against the foreign enemy. A prime example of this that we've already talked about was the Trojan War, when all of Greece, Sparta, Corinth, Athens united under King Agamemnon to defeat the Trojans during the Trojan War. After the Bronze Age collapse, Greece entered what's called the Greek Dark Ages. It lasted from 1200 to 800 BCE. It began, obviously, with the Bronze Age collapse, and it ended when the Greeks began to adopt the Phoenician alphabet and created the Greek alphabet. The Greek alphabet gets its name from the first two letters of the alphabet, alpha and beta, alphabet. Homer starts writing stories including the Iliad and the Odyssey, and there's also just a renewal of trade all around Greece. The combination of these two things is what culminated in the end of the Greek Dark Ages. The first civilization I want to talk about is the Minoan civilization in the island of Crete. The island is surrounded by cliffs, making invasion from any direction difficult. It's perhaps most famous for its art and its architecture at the Palace of Knossos. One thing that makes the palace unique is that the pillars start at the bottom, they're thin, and as you go up, they get thicker, kind of a backwards looking pillar. It makes identification of their civilization very easy. Another thing interesting about this civilization is we find these frescoes of powerful women all throughout the palace, which have led many to theorize that this could also be a matriarchy civilization. Matriarchy means that the women rule the civilization rather than the men, so the queen is the most powerful position, not the king. Another kind of famous tale and table connected to the island of Crete is the story of the Minotaur and the Labyrinth. Just before the Trojan War, King Minos, which is also where Minoan comes from, King Minos of Crete rose to power and created a navy, making Crete the most powerful island in the Mediterranean at the time. However, this was not enough to soothe his ego, and he wanted some divine sign of his right to rule. And so he prayed to Poseidon and Neptune, and he said, "Oh, please send me a sign." And Neptune sends him a nice, prime, fat, healthy bull to sacrifice. And rather than sacrifice it, King Minos sees it and he's like, I want to keep this for myself. I'll sacrifice a younger, smaller, not as healthy bull. Well, Neptune takes severe offense to this, and so he decides to have the queen of Crete, the king's wife, he has her seduced by the bull, and she sleeps with the bull. And in mythology, if you sleep and have sex with someone, it's automatic pregnancy. No ifs, ands, or buts. There is no such thing as birth control back in the ancient world, especially if you're a god. The result was the Minotaur, the child of the bull and the queen of Crete, half man, half bull. King Minos had a labyrinth built to house the bull. We don't know exactly what labyrinth actually means, however, given the context, we believe it to mean maze. There's no physical evidence of a maze anywhere on Crete, yet it's depicted everywhere, including their coins, as seen here. We have the Minotaur on the left coin, the labyrinth on the right. Another coin here, we see the labyrinth. Every few years, King Minos would send in a few humans as a human sacrifice to the Minotaur. This lasted until a famous Greek hero of Athens, Theseus, shows up and slays the Minotaur in the middle of the maze. Now, this whole story could and probably is just made up. There's no evidence of a maze, or at least no physical evidence of a maze. There's no way a human could even give birth to a half-bull, half-human organism. But it's just a cool little story about Crete. Back to the map, you can see here, Crete, southeast of Sparta and Athens, in the middle of the Mediterranean. Given its situation surrounded by water, it's powerful, it's a little mythological. Many have also come to the belief that perhaps this is the lost civilization of Atlantis, and it was swallowed up underwater and no one ever heard from them again. I don't know. Maybe. I doubt it. We're going to focus now on mainland Greece, particularly the Mycenaean Greek civilization, located just south of Corinth, in between Athens and Sparta as seen on the map. Here is a reconstructed depiction of the citadel of Mycenae. As you can see, there's a road and a ramp leading up to the gate. At the bottom of the image, there's a little hole that travelers and traders would go in and out of. Then immediately to your right, as you enter into the city, there's the graveyard. You go up the hill further to the center, and there's the palace. It's surrounded by walls. It's built on kind of a cliff formation, making it easier to defend. If you were a rich noble in Mycenae, you probably lived within the citadel. Here is remnants of the surviving citadel. This is called the famous Lion's Gate. Here is another picture of the lions up closer. You can see they're missing their faces and their heads a little bit, and they're surrounding a pillar. Now look closely at the pillar. What do you realize? The pillar is a little thinner at the bottom and gets a little thicker as you move up top. Recognize it? It's from Knossos. It's Minoan pillar, which is weird. What does this mean? I don't know. Who cares? Perhaps it means the Minoans were secretly in charge of the Mycenaean government, the deep state. I don't know. Who knows? Who cares? Just interesting to point out. Perhaps the most famous Mycenaean was King Agamemnon, which, if you remember, he was the king that Greece united around during the Trojan War, and he is the one that took the Greeks to Troy to actually fight. This is said to be the death mask of King Agamemnon, which was found by Heinrich Schliemann in 1876. It's maybe and probably a fake. We could identify in a matter of days if this is authentic, if the museum and government of Greece would simply allow a test to be taken place to find out where the gold originated from. We can test gold from any object and find out where that gold formed in the earth, and this would tell us in a matter of just a few days if this was authentic or fake. One reason, though, that I think is pretty damning on why it's fake is if you look at this picture of Heinrich Schliemann. What do you notice between the two faces? Do you see a mustache? I see one. I also see a mustache in the death mask of King Agamemnon, particularly a handlebar mustache. I've looked at many Greco-Roman statues over my life. I have never seen one with a handlebar mustache quite as good as that one. Yet Heinrich Schliemann most certainly had. Moving on to the city-state of Olympia. This is a depiction of Olympia here. Olympia was most famous because this is where the Olympics first took place. The Olympics began in 776 BCE and were held every 4 years. Famously, during this time, if there's a war going on in Greece, the war would simply be put on pause, the athletes would go compete, and the war would resume as soon as the Olympics were done. The first and only sport in the first Olympics was running, with other sports later added as they went. Many of these sports became future track and field sports, such as the discus, the long jump, javelins, different running distant races, as well as wrestling and boxing. All of this would have been done in the nude, so if we would really like to return to our ancestral roots when we recreate the Olympics, we should really be doing it in the nude. And I would like to take a second to plug my own personal cause, nudity in the Olympics. Moving on to Athens, and particularly the Acropolis. Athens is most famous for the Acropolis, and the Acropolis is one of the best surviving remnants of ancient Greece and ancient Athens. As you can see, this man is pointing to that hill above him. Here's that hill and what it looks like today. It's in relatively good shape, all things considering. The Acropolis was built around 500 BCE before the Greco-Persian Wars. The Acropolis's most famous building is the Parthenon, as seen here. The Parthenon was a temple to Athena, which is also where Athens gets its name. Athena, Athens. The Parthenon. And here's a recreation in Nashville, Tennessee, of the Parthenon and what the statue of Athena might have looked like inside. Athens was also famous for its democracy. It was led by the Council 500, which was basically its form of the Senate, and interestingly enough, membership was selected at random using a lottery system rather than an election. So your local representative was picked through lottery and then would rotate out. So when people praise Athenian democracy, yes, it was a democracy, yes, it was one of the first of its kind, but no, it was not quite what we understand democracy to be today. Moving on to Sparta. Sparta was founded around 650 BCE, so just a few years before the Parthenon was built, as a military superpower city-state in southern Greece. Sparta had and continues to have a reputation today of being an unkept society where babies were thrown off cliffs if any deformity was found at the time of birth, but it was also very advanced. For example, women in Sparta enjoyed many more rights than women would have anywhere else in the world at the time. They were encouraged and did train alongside the military, and had a lot more independence and freedom in Spartan society than women in Athenian society would at the time. The Spartans became some of the world's most powerful warriors because of their adoption of the hoplite formation from Lydia, which is another Greek city-state in modern-day Turkey, which we'll talk about later. Another thing I find interesting is here are pictures of some of the Spartan warriors battling it out with each other in that hoplite formation. If you look to the left, though, you'll see a guy not wearing armor, holding his head up high, with some kind of instrument stick around his neck. He's playing the double flute. The band is marching to music, like a marching band. Everyone say, wow, that is so cool. Just a quick summary of everything we've covered so far. So far we've talked about Troy, we've talked about Crete and the Palace of Knossos, we've talked about Athens, we've talked about Mycenae, we've talked about Olympia, and we've talked about Sparta. These are far from being the only city-states in Greece, but I believe they're to be the most important and the most influential, and they will all be on the test at the end. And they're the ones that will really end up giving the Romans the hardest time when it comes to the Romans conquering them. Interestingly enough, at this time, the world's greatest, largest, and most stable empire was the Persian Empire. Its stability is often attributed because of its relative tolerance towards the people in the conquered states. It was tolerant of people of different religions, ethnicities, cultures, such as the Egyptians and the Jews. As you can see, they conquered them fairly easily. If you're watching this and you're wondering, why haven't we covered Egypt yet? Egypt will be covered after Alexander the Great and kind of how it came to be. But something I do want to point out is that the Egyptians were not building pyramids at this point. Most of the pyramids that were built around 3000 to 2000 BCE, so long before the Romans ever showed up. It's also important for me to point out that the Persians did try several times to take Greece. However, they failed multiple times Some of the most famous examples of the Greeks repelling the Persians are the battles of Marathon in 490 and the Battle of Thermopylae in 480, where it's famous that 300 Spartans withheld an army of, I don't even remember, 10 or 100,000. I don't know the details, and I probably won't cover the details, but if you want to learn more about it, it's a pretty interesting story. Next civilization we need to cover are the Etruscans, which are just north of Rome. The Etruscans were rich from mining minerals such as bronze, silver, and iron, as seen here in this sarcophagus. You do not get such a beautiful sarcophagus without having an abundance of material and wealth. This is a picture from inside a well-preserved Etruscan tomb, and it gives us a lot of information alone. They have musical instruments. They also have fig or olive trees in the background. They're wearing sandals. They have bright colored dress. I think it's safe to say by looking at these images that these were not a wild and untamed people. These people were very advanced for their time. Here's another depiction from inside the tomb. You can see more instruments, you can see pottery, you can see jaguars, you can see planting and farming at their feet with fig trees sprouting up. We honestly don't know much about this civilization though, other than they were dominant in the region of northern Italy until 510 BCE, when the reign of the kings in Rome turns into the reign of the Republic. I also want to quickly cover the civilization of Carthage. Carthage was a former colony of Phoenicia, which was found in modern-day Syria, when Phoenicians rowed out, founded the city of Carthage as a port, and Carthage quickly grew and became so powerful, conquering the islands of Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, as well as parts of Spain. It pretty much became its own little civilization and empire, and became very independent from the Phoenicians very quickly. Last thing I want to cover is the difference between Gauls, Celts, and barbarians. Gaul was a region in modern-day France, which was mostly covered in swamp and forest. The Celts were the people that actually lived there. They were a bunch of unorganized tribes. The Romans saw them as weird. They had lots of facial hair, which is weird. And so the Romans invented a derogatory term called barbarians. It's for anyone that doesn't look like a Greco-Roman. Anyone in Britain, France, Germany, even parts of Spain. So now just a quick summary before we go. This is largely the map we'll use when we go back to our next slide. The yellow represents the Greek civilizations in southern Italy, the purple being Carthage, the bright orange is the Etruscans up north, and in the dead center you see a little black dot saying Rome. That is where we'll pick up again in the next episode, where we'll focus back on the story of the Romans and the 7 kings of Rome from Romulus to Tarquin the Proud. Thank you for watching History for Aliens. Hope to see you next time.